Well, we're in John's Gospel still. That's strange. We've only been there, about 3 months, something like that? Just kind of working our way through. In John's Gospel there in the 12th chapter, verses 7 and 8, these are mainly the words of Jesus. Listen as we share them. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me." We've been looking at Jesus. We've been looking at the things that happened. We've been looking at the words that he spoke, the miracles that he performed, and through all of it, we've been trying to learn. We've been trying to learn more about Jesus and consequently more about ourselves as we should be. We've been trying to learn more of what he wants and what he expects and what he'd like to teach us that so many times we've missed or we've not learned or we've overlooked. So now we find ourselves in John's Gospel, and last week we looked at the conflict that occurred between Mary and Judas. You remember the story? Mary had very, very, very expensive perfume, and she broke the bottle and she poured it on the feet of Jesus. Immediately, Judas, one of the 12, objected and made sort of an impassioned plea that that money should have, or that perfume should have been sold and the money given to the poor to take care of all of their needs. And on the surface, like there was some merit to what he was saying, and I'm sure there were those that were there that were agreeing with him once he gave voice to that thought. Now Mary, she felt like she owned that perfume. It actually comprised a great percentage of any wealth that she might have had. She thought she could do what she wanted with it, and out of a love for Jesus Christ, she chose to give it all to him. Judas? Well, Judas had other thoughts. He seemed to feel like the burden of the hungry, the destitute, the homeless was a greater burden and needed to be taken care of. Now, we know, at least those of us that were here last week or that have read the verses before this, we know that Judas's heart really wasn't pure there. But let's look at the argument that he put forth. How do we resolve that? I'm suggesting to you that what we need to do is exactly what we're doing this morning. We need to look at Jesus' response. How did he respond to Mary? How did he respond to Judas? What is it that he said? And what we're going to discover when we look is that Jesus, as he did throughout all of his earthly ministry, he took the things that were happening around him and he used them to teach and to impart to those that would listen the truths of God. Jesus is going to share 3 very important truths here that we need to catch, and if you're like me, you've missed it before. But come back and look and see if you can't see it. First thing, God's plan. Now the truth is, Jesus' first words were in defense of Mary. In verse 7, Jesus said, "Leave her alone." That's pretty plain. That's pretty clear. That's kind of abrupt and kind of sharp. Don't bother her. Don't mess with her. What was he saying? Don't correct her. Don't judge her. Don't condemn her for what she's done. Now, we might ask why. And he tells us in this verse. He tells us that what Mary has done is actually a part of God's desire, God's plan, established since before the world ever began. Here's something we need to learn. If what we do or what we say comes out of the depths of our heart's love and devotion for Jesus, that's fertile ground for God to use in order to accomplish His will and His purpose. Mary gave that which was the most priceless thing financially to Jesus Christ out of a deep, heartfelt love and devotion to Him. And that was good. And yet it had a much bigger significance than even that. Jesus refers to it here, but also in Matthew in the 26th chapter and the 12th verse, He says very plainly, she did it to prepare me for my burial. To prepare me for my burial. Here's what we learn. Not fully understanding it all, when Mary did this, she was following God's plan. Since before the establishment of the world. Listen to what Jesus said in that 7th verse. He said, it was intended that she should save this perfume. Her actions were symbolic of the actions of someone that's preparing a person for burial. What she was doing is symbolically saying God knows what's going to happen. Jesus wasn't going to be around much longer. None of the people there knew that, not even Mary. But in doing it, God is setting forth a statement to them. That which is going to come to pass won't surprise Him. That which is going to come to pass, He has a plan for it. That which will soon take place, God is already prepared for it. He doesn't get surprised at things that happen in your life and my life like you and I do. And He didn't get surprised at what was going to happen in Jesus' life. For ages, God's prophets had been speaking, telling of the coming of the Messiah. For centuries, they'd been prophesying not only that He was going to come, but that He was going to die. And what Mary is doing here is that which God desired, which is reminding them of God's plan, so that when it comes to pass and the followers look back, they'll say, oh, that's what she was doing. She was a part of God's plan. God was telling us so that we would know that He was in control, that He had it all. So you and I, when we see someone else out of a heart of devotion, out of the depths of love, do that which is for Jesus alone. We shouldn't sit in judgment upon them. When you and I, out of a heart of devotion and out of the depth of love, have that which we're prompted to do, we should do it, never knowing but what we're not fulfilling the long-term plan of God. Jesus said this action wasn't a coincidence. This action wasn't isolated. This was a part of God's plan set in motion before He created our world. The second thing Jesus talked about is the poor. You remember Judas made an impassioned plea about the poor. Now we know all he wanted was the money, because he kept the money and he used it himself. But he made this impassioned plea. Jesus' words about the poor are something our world needs to hear, because there's often a confusion and a warped sense when it comes to the needs of the poor. There, not all, but there are many who've lost their focus on what God's view is concerning meeting the needs of the poor. There are individuals and there are churches who give every iota of their efforts and their being to meeting the needs of the poor. And they seem to suggest that was the whole purpose of Christ. And so by their words and their actions, they would say to the rest of the world, when you look at Jesus, what you want to see is here is a man that sought to meet the needs of the poor, as if that summed up all there was to know about Jesus. Jesus said, you will always have the poor among you, but. You will always have the poor among you, but. Now, when you touch a subject like this, that has an emotional impact on many of our hearts, it's easy to not understand some things. So let me tell you what I'm not saying here and what I don't believe Jesus was saying. Jesus was not saying that the needs of the poor are not genuine. They really, really are. Jesus was not saying that you and I should not care what happens and that you and I should not seek to meet those needs. We should. Jesus did. The Gospels record him feeding and caring and ministering to the poor. Neither is he condemning those who seek to meet the needs of the poor. But this is what he is doing. With his words, he's trying to give us a reminder. He's trying to tell us that meeting those needs was not his primary focus, his primary purpose in coming. That Jesus came primarily for a far greater need and a far greater purpose than just feeding the hungry and clothing the scantily clad. He said in the 19th chapter of Luke in the 10th verse, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. Now, what is he saying here? He's saying, don't get your views warped, people. In Mary and Judas, you have a chance to understand something. Caring for the poor is good. Jesus set it up. He did it. The early church did it. Don't lose the fact that it's good, but at the same time, don't make it the primary purpose. That's not why we're here. That's not why he was here. Jesus said, we'll never eliminate poverty. If you want to really impact people, share the gospel. He came that men might be rightly united with the Father. And the command that he gave to his followers and his church was to go into all the world and share the gospel. Oh yeah. And along the way, they fed, they clothed, they healed, they helped. As Southern Baptists, we're doing that all over the world. As a church, we're seeking to do that. It's a good thing. It's not the primary thing when you look at the issue of the poor. The poor, limited time. Jesus said, verse 8, but you will not always have me. But you will not always have me. When he says this, he's issuing both a reminder and a challenge to all of us. A reminder that his time on this world was limited, and so are ours. A reminder to keep our priorities straight, and that all the good deeds in all the world aren't greater than our love and our service to him. He's to be our purpose for living. All that we do is to be done for him and for his glory's sake. Just as every miracle that Jesus performed pointed to the Father and to the ministry that he had come to perform in our world, that all mankind might come to know that salvation is possible through faith in him. in his statement, Jesus is clearly focusing upon the element of time. They don't know it. They couldn't see the future. You and I don't know what's in the future. But what he's saying is, what you don't know is, my time here is limited. I'm not going to be around very long. Don't condemn Mary for doing that which is going to be done in the very last little bit of the time that I get to spend here. What he's saying is, don't waste your time serving me. So many in our world procrastinate. They procrastinate getting involved in the work of Christ. They procrastinate putting their faith in Christ. And Jesus is reminding us in these brief little words. We don't have forever. Life is uncertain. His return is coming, just as he was leaving. Time is an element. Don't waste it. Use it. Serve the Lord your God now. Mary, don't save that perfume. Use it now. Apostles, don't waste your days. Share the good news. Churches, reach out to your community. Reach out to your world. Time is limited. We never know how long we have. Only God does. So don't waste it. What's Jesus doing? He's calling us to a priority on him. And the other good things come along the way naturally. But the priority stays on him. Loving, serving, and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. That's Jesus' response to the conflict. Don't ever put anything above him.